A very good afternoon to all of you. Hope everyone is safe and are doing well. I am Dr. Alok Sharma, convener of the placement committee, as well as the organizer and moderator of this webinar. Law Center 1 Faculty of Law, under the guidance and mentorship of our professor in charge, Dr. Sirabjit Kaur, has been celebrating glorious 50 years of Law Center 1. In the light of the same, we have been running a career-oriented lecture series with the support of our PIC ma'am and our faculty members. In continuation of our career-oriented lecture series, we are delighted to have on board Mr. Madhavan Srivastavan, founder, Law Office of Madhavan Srivastavan. Mr. Madhavan is a skilled independent corporate lawyer and founder of Law Office of Madhavan Srivatsan, with a demonstrated history of working in the legal services industry. As an alumnus of Faculty of Law, Mr. Madhavan specializes in the field of business and corporate law and advisory. He brings over 2 decades of experience in diverse practice areas such as mergers and acquisitions, private equity, joint ventures, commercial contracts, corporate advisory, and commercial litigation strategizing. Over the last 19 years, he has mainly worked as corporate lawyer in one of the prominent corporate law firm, Desai and Divanji, as a transactional and advisory corporate lawyer. He has also briefly practiced in Delhi High Court and district courts tribunals in corporate law and has worked as an in-house counsel as head of corporate legal department. His last position was partner in Desai and Divanji, and his experience in Desai and Divanji has been longest part of his career journey. He worked there for more than 13 years and is specialized in the field of M&A and the other things which I have already mentioned. He also worked in the area of project finance and capital markets. Mr. Madhavan has worked in all the main areas of corporate laws, and he has also worked in corporate law firms, worked as in-house counsel. So basically, he has done many things which generally we do not find a lawyer has done, different areas of work. And he thought on startups and featured in Times of India on a couple of occasions in the recent times. Thus, having rich and varied experience in corporate laws, he is always interested in talking to students and younger legal professionals who are interested in making a career in corporate laws. With a very warm heart, I would like to welcome Mr. Madhavan for a brief discussion and conversation on corporate law as career options, final points. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And before I begin, I'll just take half a minute to share something with you. So my internet connection as of now, it's absolutely fine. In case if you feel that there is something, you let me know. Then I'll have to switch my server. And so I'll begin now. And ma'am, how much time we have?
You can have 1 hour.
Okay, perfect. So I'll start now. And ma'am, let me know if you are able to see the screen which I'm sharing right now.
Yes.
Okay. So hi students, hi everyone. I would want to, before I start, just a couple of things. I have kind of made this PPT and I've prepared for this talk completely based upon my experience. The idea being that we have to create some kind of a value addition to all of you. So I would request each of you to pay as much attention as possible. Even though the idea would be that I would want this presentation little light. The idea is because if we make it too heavy, I mean, you may miss the finer points. We will keep it light, but at the same time, I'm going to cover some of the very practical points which otherwise you will not find. So, I mean, without sounding arrogant at all, this is something which you may not find it on your Google searches or something, the points which I will try to cover. And then we will also have a quick Q&A. It may not be possible to cover all the questions, but let's try and see how we go along. Okay, so basically what I'm going to talk right now is purely from a non-litigation point of view. So when we talk about corporate laws in general, it is mostly from a non-litigation point of view. from a litigation point of view, I will not say it's relatively simpler to understand, but as all of us know that litigation means that you join a litigation chamber, you join a law firm which has a court practice, and then you become a court lawyer, which generally people are aware of. What happens in most of the law colleges, and that's I will not say it's a problem, but I mean that's an issue which has to be addressed later on. But in most of the law colleges, many of the final year students, they are not completely aware of as to what actually the corporate laws is and what happens in a corporate law firm and what are the different practice areas. As a result, what happens, and this is very important for all of you to note, and I'm not trying to scare you, the initial start in our profession is important. Now what may happen is that just because of sheer lack of knowledge, you may have the resources, you may have the skills, you may have the talent, but just because of lack of knowledge, one may not be able to take the right decision, and after 3 years, 4 years, he finds that this is not what he or she wanted to do. By the time it becomes little late. So the idea is to bring that kind of a knowledge to you so that you can take an informed decision when you pass out from your law college. Now our discussion from 2 points of view. One is law firm and one is in-house counsel. Now we'll cover each of them. I would want to cover law firm more in detail, and we'll also talk about in-house counsel, but primarily from a corporate law point of view. These are the two options available to you when you pass from your law college or when you're in final year law college. Let's try and cover from the law firm point of view first of all. Now, take your time to go through this slide, but at the same time, pay attention to what I have to say, what I have to discuss with all of you. Now, one thing which I have always find lacking, and I've spoken to many interns, many final year students, many freshers also, many of them are not generally aware about as to what actually the practice areas are. They may be aware in general, but they don't know what actually happens in these practice areas. And none of these practice areas are part of any of the detailed curriculum in any of the law colleges. Now, typically, when we talk about a corporate law firm, it can be segregated under two heads. One is a practice area and one is as per the industry. Let's talk about the practice areas first. And I've kept it generic in the sense that these practice areas, which I've listed, which is there in your screen, are the most commonly available practice areas in any tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 firms. A tier 1 firm or a tier 2 firm can add as many as want, but these are the general corporate practice areas. And before I forget, if you want to know more about practice areas, the best way to do is to go to any of the websites of any of the law firms, and you can get to know as to what are the different practice areas in which they're operating. Now coming to this, so the practice areas are mergers and acquisitions, which we call as M&A. It is shortly formed M&A. Then there is private equity. Then there is project finance, capital markets, banking and finance, intellectual property, and general corporate advisory. We will go into detail of each of them as to what actually happens from a very, very broad point of view, so that you people understand as to what it involves. And based upon whatever knowledge you get in this session, my request to each one of you would be, and this is very, very important, it may sound very simple, but I have seen many interns not following this. Once you have got some knowledge after our session, you should go and do your independent research on Google based upon whatever we discuss and do a self-study. Based upon that, what will happen is that you will come to know that as to that particular practice area is of your interest or not. Do you have the knack to follow that or not? And each of these practice areas might be an independent practice areas. Basically, mergers and acquisitions and private equity can be one practice area for a law firm. But apart from that, there are firms which have practice areas only in one practice area. I mean, which practice only in one of these options. Each of them are standalone. They are not correlated to any one of them. Then as per industry, now there is invariably there's no law firm which will practice as per the practice areas. The industry becomes important is because some of the law firms may be mainly focusing only on those industry areas. For example, real estate or FMCG. There are law firms which practice only in startups. There are law firms which practice of any one of them. But these are only industry areas. As a corporate lawyer, if you join any of the law firms which is practicing in any of the particular industry area, your knowledge of that particular industry area is very, very relevant. Now, that is something which you may not know today, but absolutely nothing to worry about, because nobody expects you as a fresher to have a knowledge about these particular industry areas. But yes, it is always advisable that before you go for your interviews or before you start your work, you should read up a little bit upon on this industries area wherever the law firm is practicing, because none of this practice area, none of these industry areas are taught in law colleges in detail. So it's absolutely fine if you don't have specific industry knowledge, but once you start working, you will have to gain those industry knowledge. Now let's come to the practice areas from a generic point of view. Let's start with M&A. Now M&A, mergers and acquisitions, is the most commonly used term, and it's one of the most common practice areas in any of the corporate law firms. Now, please mind it that when we say mergers and acquisitions, many a times law students and final year law students or freshers, they tend to confuse this with amalgamation or court-driven merger process. It is absolutely the other way around. There is no court process involved. The practice areas, that practice areas is basically handled by the litigation team. The non-litigation team does not handle any of those amalgamations or merger-driven court processes. When I say mergers and acquisitions, what I mean is it is a private transaction between two parties wherein one corporate buyer wants to acquire another corporate entity from the sellers. Now, the sellers may either be a corporate entity or investors. So it's a pure private transaction between two parties without going to the court. And the reason, and mostly it is acquisition. For example, there is a company A operating in the fields of, say, pharmaceuticals. For its strategic alliance, for the growth of its business, it wants to acquire a company B, which is also in pharmaceutical division. It may go and acquire 10% shares, 20% shares, 30% shares. When it acquires that, that is called as acquisition. The reason why we call it merger is mainly because it is a kind of a merger of two entities just from a business point of view. Don't get confused from the court-driven point of view. That kind of a practice area is handled basically by the litigation team. But the reason why it is there is because a law firm which is handling an acquisition, which is doing an acquisition practice area, will invariably also have a merger practice area, which is court-driven process. Now in M&A, basically there are three, which is a buyer, a seller, and a target company. Now, either of them may be a foreign party, or all of them may be a domestic party, but all of them cannot be foreign parties, because as Indian lawyers, we cannot opine and we cannot work on a mandate in which Indian parties are not involved. I mean, you cannot issue an opinion with respect to that. Then the way a merger and acquisition happens is that in the example which I just gave, company A will acquire company B either under of the two routes, which is either an equity purchase or an asset purchase route, which means that a company A wants to acquire the business of company B. Now it has two options. One is that it will either acquire, say, 10% shares, 15% shares, or 50% shares, or 60% shares based upon its commercial arrangement. That is we call as an equity purchase route. The other route is that rather than acquiring the shares purely from a tax point of view, for a tax benefit, they may say that I don't want to acquire the shares of this company, current shareholders. I will acquire the business as it is. When they acquire the business as it is called an asset purchase route. Under asset purchase route, mainly it is the benefit. Your tax advice is very important. And as corporate lawyers, we don't go too much into tax. It is always given by a tax expert who is basically the finance guys, because this is covered under what we call as a slump sale agreement. Now, the documentations which are involved in these kind of transactions is the share purchase route or the subscription or the investment agreement. It's just all nomenclature. When you are now, please pay attention. This is very important. If you are doing an equity purchase deal in mergers and acquisitions, then if your arrangement is that you are going to purchase the shares, which is purchase the existing shares from the promoters, there is no new issuance of shares to you. You are purchasing the existing shares from the promoters, from the existing shareholders. Then execute a share purchase agreement or an investment agreement, whatever you want to call it. But if you are going to subscribe, if the investor is going to, if the acquirer is going to subscribe to the new shares, which means that new shares are going to be issued, which means an increase in the share capital, paid up share capital. In that case, what you will execute is what we call as share subscription agreement. That can also be called as investment agreement, but that is basically a share subscription agreement. Now, along with this, because the acquirer has become a shareholder. Have acquired less than 100% shares, which is say 40%, 50% shares, then the existing shareholders and the new acquirer will together execute a shareholder agreement, which will run parallelly along with the share subscription agreement. The process which is involved is initially what we execute is a document is called a term sheet. Now, again, it is important to note that term sheet is a non-binding term sheet. So what happens is that when parties start talking, beyond a certain point, it is not advisable to keep everything verbally, because from the time when they start talking until the time they actually execute a document, there are a lot of commercial arrangements. It is humanly impossible to remember everything, and just to keep it as a record on email is not a very professional advice. So what parties do is that they execute a term sheet, which is also in the form of an MOU, memorandum of understanding. It is non-binding in most of the cases. The only thing which it records is that for a period of 60 days or 90 days, till the time parties, they give themselves the time, that during this time either of the parties will not talk to any other third party, so which we call as an exclusivity period. Apart from that, they just record all the commercial arrangements which they want to have in the documentation, which is how many number of shares are going to be acquired, what is the share price, what is the consideration, what is the mode of payment of consideration, are there any conditions specifically which is required by an acquirer, are there any conditions specifically which is required by a seller, what happens to the employees, what happens to the intellectual property. All of this commercial arrangement is captured in the term sheet, not in a legal language, in a very plain simple English language. Many a times the term sheets are not drafted by the lawyers but by the commercial parties themselves, and they just give it to the lawyers. When the term sheet is drafted, then a process called due diligence takes place. Due diligence means due diligence can be a legal diligence, it will be a financial diligence, and it will be a business diligence. Lawyers are involved in legal diligence, finance guys in business and finance diligence. In a legal due diligence is done by the acquirer. Why? Because acquirer wants to know that he has spoken to the promoters, he has to the promoters of the company which is to be sold. He has understood that from the balance sheet, so he has broadly made up his mind to acquire the shares in that company. But now he wants to go into the details and know what he is stepping into, and that's why he does a diligence in which he wants to know each and everything about the company, about for the last say 5 years or 7 years, as to what kind of business company has done, what kind of liabilities company has, what kind of assets company has, how many employees are there, what kind of contracts the company has. Now all of this becomes part of the due diligence. Once the due diligence is takes place and it's completed, some of the times there are some red flag issues which are identified, which is brought to the attention of the acquirer. The acquirer will then sit with the seller and will try to sort out those issues, in which they will say that these are some of the issues which we have identified in the diligence. You please sort them out, and then only we will sign the documentation. For example, they may say that my lawyers have identified that some of the agreements are not duly stamped, so you please pay the correct stamp duty. Or some of the documents are not registered, you please pay the correct stamp duty. Or they may say that we have identified from your contracts that some of the contracts are very weak in your favor. For example, they may have a termination clause which might say that it can be unilaterally terminated by the other side. So the acquirer may say that the moment I come into the company, what happens immediately if after 3 months that particular contract is terminated? Because currently I have given a lot of value to that contract, because that is going to fetch a lot of income for the next 5 years, and that's why I want to acquire the company. But after 3 years, what if after 3 months, what if the contract is terminated unilaterally? So you please go and amend the contract and try and ensure that contract cannot be unilaterally terminated. So these are some of the issues which they come up with. Once all these issues are resolved, then documentation, which I have already mentioned, which is the share purchase or the subscription agreement, and along with the shareholders agreement. Now, what kind of knowledge is required? Now, this point I have covered in every slide is because this is the most important thing for all of you guys. The other things is something which you will do your Google search, you will come to know, somebody may also explain to you. Now, this is very, very important, is that right now, as we speak, you are in your final year law colleges or in your second year, whatever you are. Now, as soon as you start, it's very, very important because the competition these days is so much that the law firms, and I've taken many interviews. When when I take interviews, the first thing which I expect, and I'm sure that many of the partners in other law firms also, whether tier one, tier two, they also expect that even though you may not have read all these laws in detail and it is more of a practical which you will gain an experience, but at least we expect you to understand some of the laws, and you should have done some self study, because if you are projecting your interest in these practice areas, what is it that you have done? And tell me that I have not been taught these subjects in the law colleges, which is fine. But then what is it that you have done on your own? You can't just simply rely on your teachers and professors in law colleges, because this law subject is so wide that even in your entire, even a lawyer who has worked for more than 50, 60 years, he may not know entire laws, right? Which you are completely aware about. So how is it possible that you will be taught entire law about corporate laws in just your 3 year or 5 year course? It is not possible. So you have to do a self study. Now in M&A, the kind of special knowledge, there might be other laws, but the special knowledge which is absolutely necessary for you to go into this practice areas is Companies Act, Contract Act, Competition Act, FEMA. Now from a FEMA otherwise is a very big subject area, but in FEMA, at least the NDI rules, earlier it used to be called as FDI, Foreign Direct Investment. It is now they have changed the name and it is called as non-debt instruments. Knowledge of this is required if one of the parties is a foreign party. If the acquirer is a foreign acquirer, then his investment into India will be governed by these laws. Then SEBI takeover code. Why? If the company which is being acquired, if it is listed on the stock exchange, then SEBI laws also come into play, and particularly the takeover code is important. So all this knowledge, you may have it a part of your curriculum or not, but it is very, very important that you should do a self-study and understand a bit about it. The reason why I'm saying a bit about it is because practically also, any corporate lawyer will not know everything about these laws offhand. Today so when you start practicing, you will, so don't think that you are going to sit in exams when you start practicing. You will have your books. You can refer the books as much as you want. Many a times, even after having completed 19 years, 20 years in my experience, today also I get stuck, and all I have to tell the client is that I'll get back to you. I don't know the answer to this right now. I'll get back to you. I'll do my study. But to do study, you should at least know for, right? You can't go on a wild goose chase at that point in time. So at least you should know where to look for. Now where to look for is something which you can spare the time today when you are in your law colleges and try and read about this laws. So this is mainly about M&A. Let's go to the next side, which is private equity. Now M&A and private equity are more or less part of the same practice area, even though in concept they are different. Why they are different? The biggest difference between both of them is that in a private equity transaction, it is financially driven transaction. A M&A transaction is strategically driven transaction. For example, a company A wants to acquire company B, and both of them are in pharmaceutical business, and company A wants to acquire company B because of the growth, and this is a strategic alliance. It's a strategic acquisition. In private equity, what happens is that the company A is in requirement of funds. It requires some money. For some reasons, it does not want to take any more loan. It does not want to raise capital. Want to go into IPO. It wants to raise private capital. Now, when it wants to raise private capital, it has an option that it can issue shares to a financial investor, and that financial investor is not concerned with the nature of the business. Is only concerned with that if I am giving you 100 rupees, if I am investing 100 rupees today, after 3 years or after 5 years, how much money will I get it in return, which we call as IRR, internal rate of return. This is the biggest difference between M&A and private equity transaction. In an M&A transaction, an acquirer is there for a long-term investment. In a private equity transaction, the private equity investor is saying that I am not concerned what you do after 10 years or 7 years of your life. I am giving you this money. I want this money back after 3 years or 5 years. And you have to give me with certain returns. That is a private equity transaction. In that also, like M&A, it can happen either the private equity investor may either put money in the company and get new shares issued, or he may buy shares from the existing shareholder. In a private equity transaction, you will always, 99.9% cases, you will always have a shareholders agreement, because a private equity investor will never acquire 100% shares of the company, because he is not strategically driven, he is financially driven. The reason why he is financially driven and the reason why he will not acquire 100% is because he is saying that I don't have the expertise to run the pharmaceutical business, or I don't have the expertise to run an FMCG business or a real estate business. I don't have that expertise. My expertise is money making. So I will give you the money, but you run the business for me and give me the return back. Now, for you to run the business, you have to be in control. So private equity investor will never take more than 50% shares also in most of the cases. It will take less than 50% and then will execute shareholder agreement. And in shareholder agreement, a private equity investor will tell the promoters that I have left everything into your hands. So I have not secured any property. This again is the big difference between this and the loan transaction. When banks gives a loan, they mortgage all the properties. A private equity investor will never mortgage any properties. So he will say that I am completely at your hands. So I want certain protection. I'm not going into detail of that. That's a complete subject, a different subject matter itself. But he will say that I want certain rights, and all those rights will be covered in the shareholders agreement. So in a private equity transaction, a shareholder agreement is very, very important. Again, the private equity investor can be a domestic investor or a foreign investor. If a investor is a foreign investor, you will have to comply with the FEMA rules. And again, more or less the same process which is involved, which was there in M&A, which is a term sheet. A due diligence will take place. Here, private equity investor will actually go in a very, for him, the diligence is very, very important. Even though for M&A also the diligence is important for acquirer, but for a private equity investor, it is extremely important because his only point of reliance is due diligence. So there is a lot of stress. I'm not trying to scare you, but there is a lot of stress on the corporate lawyers who go for diligence. Like I've done many diligences for the first 10 years, and for literally for a week, for 10 days, we used to be locked in a room, in the data room. We used to study all the documents of the company. The best part about that, which now I realize, is that if you join a law firm which is mainly on the private equity or any other practice area and is not driven by the industry practice areas, like for example, they do transactions in all industry verticals. In that case, what happens is that you will get an option, you will get a chance, exposure to go and do a diligence on the pharmaceutical company. Then next month you are doing a diligence on the aviation company. Then next month you are doing a diligence on the FMCG company. And then you are doing a diligence on the real estate company. All these four industries are completely different from each other. And what happens is that once you have done the diligence, you will get to know more about the company than the company people itself. If you go and speak to an accountant of that company, he will only know what are the accounts and what is the financial position. He will not know cases. If you go and speak to an in-house lawyer of a company, he will only know about the legal cases going on. He will not know about what is the financial strength of the company. But you, as a lawyer who is doing a diligence on the entire company, you will come to know everything. So your knowledge will be as good as what a knowledge of a director of a CFO of a company will be. And just imagine that once you have done these diligences over say 6 years, 7 years, 10 years across various industry verticals, how much knowledge you will have, how much substance you would have built yourself. So the reason why I'm stressing on this point is because you have to invest your time. So don't be in a hurry. Rome was not built in a day. The problem with most of the youngsters these days is that start of the career, because particularly about, I mean, just on a lighter note, because they may have seen all this web series, Suits and whatever. Everybody wants to walk into a posh office. Everybody wants to walk into an office with a cabin, with a furnished office. Life doesn't work like that, guys. You have to build your innings. You have to start from the scratch. If you ask me, just because you have a law degree does not mean that you have any value in the corporate industry as such. The only value which you have is that you are entitled to practice as a corporate lawyer. Now you have to start again. You have to start from the scratch. So give yourself time and it will happen. Believe me, it will happen. Then we come to another practice area, which is completely different from the first two, which is M&A and private equity. The other practice area is project finance. Now, project finance is purely on the debt side. Unlike M&A and private equity, where company issues shares to raise funds, in project finance, company will take a debt. This is also a means to raise finance. So corporate law mostly is about strategic alliances and raising finances. But please don't get confused. It is not that you have to have a knowledge of any financial laws or financial standards, accounting standards, or any. So all of that is not required. In project finance, what happens is, don't get confused with banking and finance. In a project finance, the banks will lend to the company certain amount of money for a specific project. For example, there is a company, say example an L&T or Reliance or Tata's, who are in the business of construction of certain projects, construction of say highways, construction of dams, or construction of airports. Now it's a specific project. They may have applied for a tender and they may have won that tender, and now they want to construct a particular project. Now it is very specific project. It is not that they just want to construct. It is identified that, say for example, in Ahmedabad they have to construct 200 kilometers of highway, or in the city of Pune they want to construct some dam, some power project, or in Visakhapatnam they want to construct some specific dam. For that particular project, company requires debt. Why? Because the project costs too much. Like it's in multiples of crores. It's like 500 crores, 600 crore, 1000 crore, 5000 crores. That's the project cost. Now it is not possible for the company to fund completely on their own. No company does that. No matter how big the company is, everyone will take debt. Now, when they take debt, typically as per industry standard, we call this as a debt equity ratio, which is 70:30 or 3:1, you may call it, which means that in order to build that particular project, if 1000 rupees are required, company will put 300 rupees from its own pocket and 700 rupees it will take as debt. This 700 rupees which is taken as debt from the lenders for a particular project is called as project finance. That is the project finance in broad. Now it is again a very private arrangement between the lender and the borrower. The lender can be either one bank or it can be a consortium of banks. It can be multiple banks depending upon how big the project is and what is the exposure of each particular banks. The parties which are involved are lender, obviously the one who is giving the money, the borrower. Then the promoters are also made parties to all the documentation because they stand as a guarantors. Because as you might have studied in the Companies Act, that once a company is formed, a private limited company, it has a separate distinct entity. But the liability of the promoters, the shareholders is limited to the amount of shares which they are holding in the company. So if God forbid, if the company goes down tomorrow, down the drain, and the lenders are not able to recover their entire debt from the company, then they want the promoters, the shareholders to stand as guarantors. And that's why they want to make promoters as a party, because they know that we cannot go beyond your limited liability concept under the Companies Act. And that's why we want you to be personally liable by a separate contract to undertake to ensure that the company will repay us the money back along with interest. And then there is a security trustee. Security trustee is a little complicated. It's not a complicated subject, but currently I'm not going too much into detail. It's basically a independent party, because the lenders and the banks will typically say that my business is to lend money, return on that. I am not going to, because they are going to mortgage all the assets. The banks may say that I don't have the infrastructure to keep custody of your assets, or to keep custody of all the documents, or to have the or to run the process. So they may appoint an independent security trustee who will manage the entire process. So security trustee is just like a consultant. He will just manage the process. He will ensure that all the rights of the lender are duly protected. Then, as I mentioned, it is a debt transaction and no shares are issued. Please keep it in mind, no issuance of shares. It's just a pure loan transaction. Now, as I explained that it is done for a particular project, all the assets of the borrower are secured in favor of lender, in the sense that the lender will create a lien, a hypothecation, a mortgage. Now, this is where your understanding of Transfer of Property Act, Contract Act becomes very, very important. You should actually know what are the different kinds of mortgages in India, which is possible. What is the difference mortgage, a hypothecation, a lien, how a charge is created on the assets of the company, because this is where, as a counsel of the lender will expect you to know. So if you want to go into this practice area, I would strictly advise that currently in your law colleges, when you're there, you should study in detail about all these concepts. Now, the documentation which are involved are loan agreement, which is also called as common loan agreement. And then there are various kind of security documents which I explained, which can be a hypothecation deed, a mortgage deed, a lien charge, whatever documents are required. And then there are guarantee documents. Now, guarantee documents are executed mainly by the promoters of the company, the owners of the company, which can be a corporate guarantee or it can be a personal guarantees. So there are various kind of guarantees given by the promoters, wherein they stand behind the company and give a comfort to the lenders that if company is not able to repay the debt, then promoters will repay that from their own pocket. And typically there is a time period of 10 years to repay that debt. So within that 10-year period, if the company is not able to repay the debt, then promoters are made party to this. Now, again, it is very interesting. You should do your independent research and try and know that currently, as we speak, under the IBC laws, what are the kind of amendments which have been made in order to bring promoters as part of the IBC process. Because under IBC today, if a company is not able to repay the debt, the lenders can take them to IBC. But till some time back, there was a discussion point that promoters as individuals cannot be under the IBC. So please try and read that. It's very interesting. Again, the process which is involved is there is a term sheet which is executed, which is also at times called a sanction letter, in which the banks will say that what is the amount of loan which I am giving you, what is the rate of interest, what is the tenor, in the sense that within how much time you have to repay that loan back to me, what is the monthly EMI or quarterly EMI, and what kind of security I am creating on your assets. Invariably, everything is of the in favor of lenders, all the assets of the company, in the sense, and assets can be movable, immovable, tangible, intangible, everything. All land and buildings are mortgaged in favor of lenders. All movable, such as small as ACs, chairs, everything is mortgaged in favor of the lenders. Even the future income which the company is going to earn, even that is hypothecated or created a lien in favor of the lenders. So everything, whatever company owns, everything is put under charge and mortgage. And here you should also know the concept as to what is how do you create a charge in priority, because if there are multiple lenders, then everybody would want to have what the term you may have come across is pari passu charge. So what do you mean by that? So all of this concept is very, very important for you to understand. Now, I have seen that students who wants to go into this practice area, they don't try and read all of this. They feel that they have read enough in their law colleges, because all these are taught in law colleges as a part of Transfer of Property Act and Contract Act and all of the subjects. But let's be very honest, and with all due professors, it is not possible to cover everything in detail. Here you have to know everything in detail. You should know what are the Supreme Court judgments, what Supreme Court has said about how do you actually perfect a charge, how a charge is created, and what are the issues which come up. So you should do a self study on all of this. I don't want to, because ma'am is there right now. I'm sure there are other professors also listening to this, so I don't want to make a comment upon. All of us know how we pass our exams, right? All of us know that how we study for exams. So this self-study is very, very important, guys. Then again, what kind of special knowledge of laws are required for this is basically you should know Contract Act in detail. You should know your Transfer of Property Act. Now in FEMA, there is one law which is called as ECB. Now I'll just take half a minute to explain what is this. It is possible, Indian government allows that you can also raise debt from an overseas lender, from a foreign lender. And particularly for big projects, for projects which are of importance like dams or solar plants, World Bank will give a loan. The various arms of World Bank will give a loan, like ADB or other banks. Now, when they give a loan, so when a foreign lender is giving money, FEMA has made a law that it will be covered under what we call as ECB, External Commercial Borrowings. Now, why FEMA? One thing, just keep it in the back of your mind. You may already know it, but I'm just repeating it, that any foreign money which comes into India is covered under FEMA, is governed by RBI. As small as, for example, that you go to Singapore for your vacations, or you go to London for your vacations, wherever you go, you carry certain currency with you, you bring certain currency outside. You may not have realized it, but all of this is regulated by FEMA. So any foreign money coming into India is regulated by FEMA. Now, typically from a corporate point of view, from an investment point of view, there are two investment by which foreign money can come. Either it can come under the investment route, in which case company will issue shares, or it can come as debt. When it comes as investment route in which company has to issue shares, it is governed by NDI rules, which was earlier FDI, which was foreign direct investment. And when the foreign money comes into India as a loan, it is covered under ECB rules. So if the lender is a foreign lender, your knowledge of ECB is very, very important. And then obviously Companies Act. Now Companies Act is something which you should absolutely know at the back of your handbook. Now, I don't know how, and I don't know the reason as to why students who want to practice in corporate law don't take Companies Act very seriously. Now, Companies Act is a very big act, and obviously because of the current situation, I mean, not the COVID situation, but because there is a new act 2013 and there was 1956, there was too much of confusion, which one prevails over what. But there will be a time when the entire 1956 will be overridden, and now anyway, most of them is completely out now. It is 2013. Maybe we can do a different session sometime as to what kind of things you should know about companies, that irrespective of whether you are doing a private equity, M&A, or project finance or something like that, because it is not possible. It is absolutely not possible for any lawyer, any corporate lawyer, to know everything about companies. We always keep a bare act. Every negotiation meeting I walked into, invariably I have seen all corporate lawyers carrying either a Ramaiya. I mean, either the Ramaiya is kept there or they are carrying a bare act. So don't worry that people are going to expect you to quote sections. You should know sections by heart. No, at least you should know the concepts. You should know. So okay, so let me spend half a minute on this. You should know the concepts of what are the various kinds of shares, what is equity share, what is preference shares, what are debentures, how are directors appointed, how are directors meeting held, how is a shareholder meeting held, what is the concept of quorum. All of this is very important for you to know under the Companies Act as a corporate lawyer. Articles of association, memorandum of association. You may not have to go into the incorporation of a company because that's a company secretarial job, but at least you should know what is the memorandum, what is the articles of association in detail, all of these concepts. Now let's go into another practice area, which is capital markets. Now again, capital market is completely different from project finance, M&A, and private equity. Capital market means that it has to do with listing of shares on the stock exchanges of the company. So any rule of capital market, any laws of capital market or practice area of capital market will always involve a company which is listed on stock exchange, and we call that company as a listed company or a listed entity. In capital markets, what happens is the most common form of capital market is IPO, initial public offer, which means that a company today, as we speak, a company is unlisted. Now, that, and this, I'm just sharing it with all of you, that at times we have asked questions to lawyers who wants to practice in capital markets and know what is the difference between a private limited company and a public limited company. I mean, it's at times it's very shocking to know that you want to practice in capital markets and you don't even understand these basic concepts. For a company to list, only a public limited company can list on the stock exchanges. So there is a difference between a private company, a public unlisted company, and a public listed company. So there can be a public not listing its shares at all, because it does not want to list. But whenever it wants to list, whenever a private company wants to list its shares on the stock exchange, it has to first convert itself into a public company, public limited company, and then list its shares, and then it becomes a public listed entity. Now, it's one of the ways to raise a finance. Now, because the company is raising finance and raising funds from public at large, there is no particular agreement which you enter with the public. What company does, you may have come across this term, is what we call as a prospectus. To a prospectus, which is a very it's a very lengthy document, it's a very heavy document. What is the requirement of that? In that, broadly to say, company will state everything, because as per SEBI laws, it is required that a company which is raising money from the public, company on its own, because public, unlike a private equity investor who will do a diligence on the company before putting money, public is also putting money as an investor, but public at large does not have the opportunity to do a due diligence on the company. So SEBI has said that it has obligated the company that you have to inform the public everything about yourself, and you have to cover all the risk, and you have to mainly talk about all your negative things about in the prospectus. You may not want to talk about your positive, or you don't want to talk, that's up to your option. But as a mandatory, as an obligation, you have to talk about all your negative things. You cannot hide anything at all. You have to disclose everything. If there are 5 cases going against you, you have to say 5 cases. If criminal case going against the promoter, you have to mention that in the prospectus, so that the company becomes completely aware before putting in the money, so that they know, okay, fine, whether it is a risky business, whether it is not a risky business. So you have to state everything in the prospectus. This prospectus is the main document which is there in the IPO in case of any kind of a public issue. Now, there are various kinds of public issue. There can be an initial public offering. There can be a further public offering, which means that a company is already listed and it wants to raise more money. Then there can be a QIP, disqualified institutional placement, which is that even though the money is raised from public, but only from certain specified group of people, not general public at large. The parties which are involved is basically the company. because it's only one party. So there are no two parties, unlike a private equity. It is not a private transactional arrangement. Company is the main party. Apart from the company, the other main party, not party as such, the other main stakeholder who is involved is the merchant banker. Why? Because as per SEBI laws, it is that it is the merchant banker, and merchant banker is like a banking entity, which can be like, for example, a Kotak. Kotak has a merchant banking arm. Not every bank has a merchant banking arm. Some of the banks have, some of the banks don't have. And then there are various institutions, authorities which are only merchant bankers. So you have to get a merchant banking license from SEBI. Then SEBI has said that merchant banker is responsible because there is plethora of laws to be followed in capital markets. So they have ensured that it is not possible for the promoters. So I am casting an obligation on the merchant banker to ensure that all the laws of stock exchanges of SEBI are followed by the company. Then what happens is that merchant banker will then appoint a lawyer, will appoint a financial team, will appoint a tax team to ensure that they are completely protected, and the obligation which they have to fulfill, that obligation is fulfilled by these various consultants. So as a capital market lawyer, you will have to study SEBI laws, you will have to study all other capital market laws, and ensure that whatever company wants to do under it is an IPO, whether it is an FPO, or whether it is a QIP, you have to ensure that all those laws are followed, and you have to do a diligence on the company, because you are the one who are going to make a prospectus. Prospectus is made jointly by the finance team and by the lawyers team, but 70 to 80% of the job involved is by the lawyers. So when you have to make a prospectus, which means that you have to do a diligence on your own company for which you are acting, whom you are helping. So when you do a due diligence, you have to mention everything in the prospectus. Then, as I mentioned, the process is due diligence. So once you have done a due diligence, there will be certain issues which will be resolved between you, the promoter, and the merchant banker as to how to put that in the prospectus. Then you will start preparing the prospectus, and then the listing will take place, and there are various kind of compliances involved in this kind of practice areas. The laws, the special knowledge of laws which are required are SEBI, rules and laws. Now, SEBI is the governing authority for anything to do with a listed company. There are various SEBI laws and rules, but primarily you should know what we call as ICDR. I don't know, I mean, I think I mentioned that here. Sorry. I mentioned that here in the third bullet, which is ICDR, issue of capital and disclosure requirements, and LODR, and the listing agreement. These are the three concepts as part of SEBI laws which you should know. Apart from that, you should be aware about other SEBI laws also. And then obviously Companies Act you should know. And a little bit about the Contract Act as to how, I mean, those concepts of offer acceptance. People take it lightly because you feel that, oh, it's very simple, I have studied it, and you may have scored 60%, 65% in Contract Act. But believe me, when you start working, at that time, it is not, you may not know it. So brush up your knowledge on Contract Act as well. Now, this was the capital market. Now, let's go into the other practice area, which is banking and finance. Now, banking and finance, unlike a project finance, is basically, again, like a project finance, it is a debt transaction given by the lender to a company. But unlike a project finance, this is given for general corporate purposes. Unlike project finance, which was given for a specific loan, it is given for general corporate purposes. More or less, the concepts are same. There is a lender, there is a borrower, and then there may or there may not be a security trustee, and there may be more than one lenders. Again, the lender may be a domestic lender or a foreign lender, and the kind of documents which you execute are more or less the same, which is a loan agreement, the security documents, and the guarantee documents. And obviously, you will do a diligence. So this is about banking and finance. Now, banking and finance and project finance can be part of, more or less, even though concept-wise they may be different, but yes, they may be part of the same practice group also. Then we come to this intellectual property. Now, intellectual property is completely different from whatever we have spoken so far. And there are, I don't know, I would want to say many firms, but at least there are few firms which practice only in IPR. They're only IPR related firms. Now, IPR is one practice area which at least I have seen in my personal experience, whatever I have spoken to and with whatever firms I have interacted with, is that this involves both litigation and non-litigation. So depending upon, if you join the firm, depending upon which practice team or practice group you may land up in, you may be either part of both lit and non-lit team, or you may be part of non-lit team. This obviously, I mean, as you are aware that this involves everything to do with your all kind of IPR rights, which is trademark, copyrights, patents, everything. And you will be required to do filing of patents for your clients, filing of copyrights, filing of any kind of an IPR, which is a non-lit work. And then there may be certain agreements which may be drafted, which is required, which is one company wants to transfer its brand name or trademark or copyright to another company. Either transfer, there are certain things which cannot be transferred, there are certain things which can only be assigned. So all of that knowledge is very important. What can be transferred, what can be assigned, what cannot be transferred, what cannot be assigned. Based upon that, you draft an agreement so that becomes entitled to at least use that. And then there is transfer of goodwill and those kind of things. So this is all part of non-lit work. As part of lit work, mainly it is infringement, passing of suits and all come, in which case, so because this is one practice area where both lit and non-lit are kind of mixed, because your knowledge is same. Your knowledge of IPR is still the same, because if you're drafting an agreement, you should know the infringement laws, you should know the passing of laws, so that you can protect your client well. And because you know them well, your knowledge, that knowledge can be helpful in the litigation part also. So I have seen many lawyers on this particular practice area who are both court-going lawyers and as well as corporate lawyers. Again, the specific knowledge which is required is IPR laws, contract, and this is important that I feel that I'm not, to be honest with you, this is not my main core practice area, but there is some proposed data protection laws which has come into place. It has not come into place, it has been proposed. So please be aware, because by the time you pass out and you start practicing in this practice, by that time it may have been notified. So please read this. The second last bullet point, it's very, very important if you are interested in this practice area, that you should be aware of these concepts. What is confidentiality? What is exclusivity? Damages, specific performances from an IPR point of view. So these are important concepts for you to understand. Now, just quickly, this is the last topic area for today. This is general corporate advisory. Now, general corporate advisory, as the word suggests, it covers everything. It is a non-transactional work. Private equity, mergers and acquisitions are all transactional work. Capital markets is a ways to raise finance. Project finance, banking and finance is a ways to raise private finance. General corporate advisory is a non-transactional work, which means that you will be required to give various kind of opinions and advices to the clients on Companies Act, on employment laws, on SEBI, on TPA, because they may get stuck in some issue and they may not know what the actually law says. So they'll come to you and seek your help and say that, sir, we don't know what to be done in this regard. What is the law? So you will have to give an opinion. You will have to give some kind of a note. You will have to give some advice how to deal with that issue. It can be, say, for example, in transfer of property, it can be a stamp duty issue. In employment laws, it can be an issue with respect to what kind of provident funds, whether a company is liable to pay PF and ESIs and all of that. In Companies Act, people may come to you that there is some dispute between directors, how to resolve that. The company has not been able to conduct a meeting. How do you do that? It can be anything. And then the other part of work, apart from advisory and opinion work, is drafting of certain commercial contracts. It can be any commercial contract which is there for general day-to-day business requirements of a company, which are employment agreements, distributor agreements, service agreements, any kind of agreement which you may say. For this particular thing, your contract act knowledge is absolutely necessary, very, very important. And any student who wants to, or in life, whenever you want, you may get a chance to work as in-house counsel. This is very, very important, because general corporate, if you have built your portfolio as a general corporate advisory, there is no guarantee. But I feel personally, based upon my experience, that you have a better chance of going as an in-house counsel if you have built your substance in general corporate advisory work. Because as a corporate, as an in-house lawyer, these kind of subject matters are something which a company will not rely on external counsel. For transactional work, they will go to an external counsel. For M&A, private equity, capital market, they will go to an outside lawyer. But for these kind of general corporate advisory, they will want to rely on their in-house counsel. So these were few of the practice areas which I have tried to cover. Now, these are very specific. I just try to cover some kind of tips as to how do you choose an option in corporate law. So that's the most important point, right? Most of the times I find, this is the one query that most of the people come and ask me that, sir, what option do I choose? So I tell them, boss, how do I know? How do I decide that what do you want in life? You can't go and, it's like asking me that, sir, should I get married or should I get married? How do I know? You should know for yourself. So there is no specific rule for that as to what kind of option you should choose, but I've tried to put something, you can read them in detail. And ma'am, I don't mind sharing this PPT with the students if you want, because I've mainly made it for them only. So, but there are a couple of important things we should know is that whatever topics I have mentioned, in addition to that, whatever other topics are, you should do a thorough research on that. You should do a self-study. Third year is very, very important. I mean, final year is very, very important for you guys, whether third year or 5 year course, is because in this year, you are expected to know more than what you have studied in law college. And one thing, please keep it in mind, is that once you start working, for the first 6 months, nobody is going to judge you because you are a fresher. But once you have crossed your 6 months or 8 months, then people will start expecting you that now you should start delivering. Now, at that point in time, you can't get up and say, okay, fine, now I'll start learning about what is there. Because practically in corporate laws, most of the things which you are going to do are not taught in law colleges. And I'm not saying this with any kind of criticism or something, but that's the reality, that most of the things which we practice in corporate laws are not taught in law colleges. So your self-study is very, very important about topics. Once you do that on project finance, you will come to know whether these interest you or not. For example, when you start reading about project finance, people may find, oh, this is very boring. I don't have that interest. Okay, fine. So drop it. Go to something else. The moment you feel that this is my interest, start focusing on that area. Once you start focusing on that area, then next thing is try applying for internships in those firms which practice in those areas. And that's how you decide on option. Now, all of this may sound very rosy to you, because I know that most of you would be thinking in your mind that it's very easy for me to say, it's very difficult to find an internship. I will go one step ahead and say that it is impossible to find internship. Many queries I can completely understand. But abhi kya kare uska? Abhi you can't do anything about it. One thing which I can tell you with confidence, guys, is that it is not necessary that you have to start with the big tier firm, as I explained in the beginning. Is that don't have that. I mean, obviously, you should have an ambition to go into a good law firm, into a tier 1 law firm. But even if you're not able to go into a tier 1 law firm at the start of your career, doesn't matter. हमारा profession बहुत unique profession है. The more you grow old, ना, the more value you will be, the more value you will have. So बहुत time है आप लोगों के पास. इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि I'm not suggesting that you should waste your time right now, but at least for the first 10 to 12 years, don't think that don't portray yourself as after 12 years, you're going to become an established corporate lawyer. If you become, very good for you. But for the first 10 to 12 years of time, you should devote creating a substance and value in your life. One thing which I can tell you for guarantee, based upon my experience at least, is that if in the first 10 to 12 years, if you have created substance, wherever you have worked, even if you are able to work, even if you get a job in a tier 3 firm, or in a very small boutique office, or in a small law firm, doesn't matter. Go and start work there. Even if it is not of your interest, doesn't matter. Start working. Don't sit idle at home. Start working, and at the same time, do a self-study of yourself, of whatever interests you. And whether you may believe in God or not, but believe me, there is something which works, which will put you in a position someday in your life of your interest. But at that time, if you are not ready, that opportunity is gone. एक मौका सबको मिलेगा बॉस हमारे प्रोफेशन में. So don't worry, you will get to that place. It is a different thing. Some of you may get it today, some of you may get it tomorrow, but you will get that. And a last very important point on a lighter note, which I have realized, is that whatever you do today, after 10 years, you are going to regret it, because you will always feel that the other person is doing better. So don't think too much about that. Focus on what you have to do right now. And these are just couple of points which I just wanted to bring about as to so this is the last point, ma'am, and then we will take the Q&A session. I know we have just couple of minutes. Now, how do you decide between law firm and in-house counsel job? So there is no universal rule. There is no specified rule. You should talk to your seniors, you should talk to your people, but my sincere request is that don't get confused by talking to too many people, because everybody has different experiences. I have worked, so I mean, you may find it very funny. People like me are the best people to do a career counseling or to opine, because at least we can tell you what not to do. Because when I came into law college, I had no idea what I'm going to do. When I'm from CLC, so when I went into CLC, I had no idea. When I passed from CLC, I had no idea what I'm going to do in life. For the first couple of years, I did litigation, hardcore litigation, and then I went in-house. Now, this is very interesting. When I went in-house, I worked there for a year or so, and then I went to corporate law firm. I worked in the corporate law firm for a couple of years. Somehow I could not find my connect. I again moved back to the same in-house counsel job where I was working, same company where I worked. Again, I worked there for 1 year. Again, I could not find my connect there. I said, "Yaar, abhi ye kya ho raha hai?" by that time, the law firm where I had initially joined, which is Desai and Devanji, I could find my connect there because I was talking to those people. So again, I joined back. So I have done a shift between in-house counsel and law firm twice in the same places. And then I continued. And then after that, I worked there for like 13, 14 years. And then I went in-house again for some brief period of time. And now I started on my own. So literally I've done everything. तो लाइफ में ना कुछ हो जाता है, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है कि कुछ नहीं होता है, कुछ ना कुछ आप करते रहोगे, सब्सटेंस बिल्ड करोगे तो हो जाएगा. सबसे जो लास्ट इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है जो मैं विच आई वुड वांट टू स्ट्रेस अपॉन इज, if you have built substance in our profession, you will never feel insecure. And believe me, guys, irrespective of whatever background you have, whether you are a first generation lawyer or whether you are from a lawyer's family, if you are insecure, you will never be able to rise in this profession. And insecurity does not mean from financial point of view. Insecurity, you don't realize insecurity happens only when you don't have the knowledge and you don't have the substance. And that's when people start going into other kind of things. Like you will find that, oh, politics ho raha hai, ye ho raha hai, wo ho raha hai. If you have substance in you, if you have the knowledge in you in the first 5 years, which start from today, that 5 years does not start from the date when you start working. 5 years start from when you enter your final year. Before final year, it is all fine. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Obviously, you should study, but you can do whatever you want. Like you can have your parties and all of that. But once you come into final year, guys, take it seriously. If you build your substance, mark my word, you will never feel insecure in a profession. And the day you stop feeling insecure in a profession, you are sorted. So, ma'am, this was it. So I don't know whether whether it was helpful or not, but
I will say on this in the last. Students, kindly ask your questions. I take questions first, sir. Then I will say what you have. I will try to make a brief note on that, and it is very, very helpful for the student. So first, we take certain questions. The first question I would like to take is from Muskan Agarwal. Sir, could you please also highlight career opportunities in corporate law for some also wants to settle in Canada?
Okay. So basically what happens is that I'm not completely aware of this, but as far as my limited knowledge goes, is that if you have to go and practice outside India, you have to pass a bar examination of that respective country. Now, in my practical experience, I've come across many people who have settled not only in Canada, in US, in other places also. I would advise you, again, I mean, it's your personal advice. I would advise you that if you have the option to delay your Canada visit, then you should work for a couple of years in India, get a working exposure in India, work in whatever field you want to go into, and then do your LLM if you have the necessary financial resources. This is something which I tell everyone, that if you want to do an LLM, basically from abroad, don't just go and do it just for the sake of doing it. Work for 2 years and then go and do your LLM and and then you have a better option of settling either in Singapore or Canada or US, rather than directly trying to find a job. I mean, if you are able to find a job, well and good, but whatever, I have not come across a person who has immediately after passing out law college has gone to Canada. If you want to settle down in Canada, obviously, I mean, I've met people who got married, or because of their family businesses, they immediately after law college, they have to shift to other country. You may then there is no option, right? You just go, you have to give an examination of that country's whatever the rules are, and then you start working there. But if you have to plan in a way that your ambition is fine, if your ambition is that you want to settle outside India, then I would suggest that at least work for 2 years, get some exposure, do LLM from that country, and then go, and because you will be able to make your better contacts there.
Right, sir. So other question is from Niket. He says, sir, as a 3-year law student, we have lesser time as compared to 5-year law students. How do we cope up with this internship then? I'm saying this is with regard to the corporate law field.
Okay. So first of all, let me clarify one thing, is that a 3-year, in my personal experience, ma'am, and you are a better person to clarify that. You may disagree with me, but what I have seen is that there is not too much of a difference between a 3-year course and a 5-year course. In the first 2 years, it is not that you are taught very, very great amount of laws. In a 5-year course also, in the last couple of 3 years only, you are taught the important laws. And in most of the internships, what we take, at least in the firm I was in my office, I don't take interns for the first 2 years because they have actually no idea. Because taking a intern who is in a 5-year law course, who is in a first year or second year, is actually like actually I feel that I have a kid sitting in my room. I mean, you have just passed your 12th boards last year or last year, couple of years back, and for the last 4 years, you were not doing anything but studying, and now you have got this freedom. And now when they start coming working into office, they have no idea. So it is very, very, and I also pity them. So they also are not in that frame of mind to work. So we also take interns typically from third year only. So there is not too much of a difference. It is not that you're losing out on internship, but you also realize that you have no option. You are in third year law course. What you should do is that you should at least try to get 2 internships in a year. If you are a fresher, anyone who's a fresher, I would advise them that immediately when in a third year course, start applying for internships. So you should have 6 internships by the time you college. And internships, even if you are in second year, doesn't matter. You start from now. So whatever time has gone, right? You start from internship, and it is advisable to have different internships. Don't try to do internships repeatedly, because that reflects on your CV. And then as a partner, as a person who's taking an interview, I'll come to know that, boss, this is something which you have done because you know someone and you have just like kind of procured it. So don't try to repeat your internships. In the last year, you should try to repeat your internship, because if you are trying to find a placement there in that firm, then that's fine. But in the first 2 years, 3 years of your internships, try to have a varied experience of even those areas which does not interest you. So you will get to know.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so Parvez is asking, sir, what will be your advice for the BCom honors graduates to pursue career in corporate law? What he should have to do with the from now if currently he is pursuing LLB? Basically, what is the option for the commerce students?
Okay, so let me clarify that this law profession is such a unique profession, and I think that this is either one of the only profession or maybe one of the very few profession which does not have anything to do with your background. You may be from humanities, you may be from science, you may be from commerce, but does not matter at all. You read this for the first time. Now I am from a BCom graduate. I'm not BCom honors, I'm a BCom graduate. But believe me, I have met far better corporate lawyers than me, more intelligent corporate lawyers than me, who are from humanities background and who are from science background. So there is no difference at all. It is, if you want to do corporate law, it does not matter whether you have done BCom honors or whether you have done BA honors or whether you have done BSc. If you are in law, if corporate law interests you, you should focus on what we have discussed so far. Before what you have done law, it will help you. Yes, absolutely, it will help you, because you will be able to understand your balance sheets. You will be able to understand your commercial laws better. But that is only for a brief period of time. It is very easy for a humanities background student also to catch up to that. So be very clear in that.
So background does not matter. It matters how you work.
The only place where it matters, ma'am, on a very practical point, is that if you want to practice in the patent side, because there are many law firms who prefer that one who wants to practice as a patent lawyer should have a science background.
Right.
That's the only one specific area.
Yeah. Okay. So another is from Galaxy. Sir, do we can't pursue CS with law? Since a course for understanding subjects like Company Act, FEMA in more detail. With law, I think you cannot do.
No, you can do, ma'am. ऐसा नहीं है कि आप नहीं कर सकते. उसमें कुछ rules हैं. I think you'll have to follow the rules. But I'll just spend half a minute because this is very interesting and this is very personal to me. So I did law because I wanted to do CS. Honestly, I had no clue about law. So just a practical experience. When I was, after my graduation, I enrolled for CS, and I was in my intermediate group 1, and that's when people told me that you should combine this with law. So I said, okay, fine. Now when I combined this with law, so initially I got through when I gave my law entrance, I came through LC1. So my first thing was in LC1 only. So then people told me that you should go to LC1 because आपको CS के लिए पढ़ने के लिए ज़्यादा time मिल जाएगा. So I said okay, but then for some reason I thought कि let me go to CLC because I wanted to focus more on the law side and less on the CS side. And maybe that's the mistake which I did at that point in time, because when I went into CLC, my exams started clashing. Because CS का और law का exam सबका December, June का सबका common date sheets आता है. So invariably, practically, I had a situation wherein in 15 days, I had to appear for 10 exams. So it is literally impossible. And then the same thing happened in June also. So then I dropped secretary. But today, if you ask me, I think it was a blessing in disguise, because obviously, I'm not making any comment on the CS professional, but CS is absolutely a great profession. Combination of CS and law is indeed a great thing, both for CS and both for law. But it is difficult in the sense that academically, if you feel that you are a very studious person and you are academically very oriented, then absolutely it will add value to your law degree. If you want to practice as a lawyer, it will add value. If you want to practice as a CS, it will help you. But what is important is that when you pass out, you should know whether you want to practice as a CS or as a lawyer. After 3 years, you cannot say that I want to change the side. So you should know very clearly whether you want to practice CS, because completely different sides. If you want to practice CS, you will have to take different decisions. If you want to practice a corporate lawyer, you will have to take different decisions. So that be very clear of, but yes, it will help you.
Okay, sir, the next question will be from Govind. He's asking, good afternoon. Since our curriculum is not corporate based, before interviews, to grab on the knowledge threshold, if sir could recommend from where we should study from, or any modules, the various areas of practice are highlighted in the PPT, what would also help us choose our interest of practice as well? Thank you very much.
Okay, so yeah, it's a good question. So what I would advise you practically is that whenever you know that you have to go for your interview, it can't be that you are coming, that today you're waking up and saying, okay, fine, now I'll start applying, right? So you must have planned in well in advance. So I always tell people that when you're in your final year law course, please subscribe to any of the financial newspapers. That is very, very important. Economic Times or Financial Times or Mint or whatever you want to subscribe, please subscribe to that, because that will give you industry knowledge. That will give you knowledge about what kind of mergers and acquisitions are happening, what deals are happening, which I just spoke about. And it is very, very impressive for a final year student to just drop certain names in your interview. So this is, and when you start reading on those news, you will automatically find a connect. You will automatically find interest. And when you start reading those news, most of them you will not be able to understand, and there will be an instinct in you to understand that, and then you will do your own Google search, you will do your research in books and all. So I feel that as a starting point, the best thing is start reading newspapers. The second thing is, there is no prescribed book as such. Apart from your academic courses, I prefer that either a Ramaiya or anything else can be good on the Companies Act to read about that. As far as choosing a career in corporate law is concerned, there is no book. That's the reason why I have given enough time to make this PPT, just so that I can share some points with you. But there is no specific book, and I will also not advise you that you should go and read any book, because it keeps on changing. Every 6 months, the industry changes. The industry verticals change. Now, because of COVID-19, we don't know 3 months. So, but you should start with your newspaper reading. You will come to know of your interest, and whatever subjects we have spoken about, do a self-study on Google search. There's so much of information available that you will be able to automatically on your own follow it, but start it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay. So another question is, sir, if possible, please in next webinars, cover the industry part also, that if you have mentioned in your slides. So definitely we will invite Madhavanji again for this. Okay. So Divya asking, sir, how helpful is CS courses in today's context along with the law for someone who wants to go for a career in corporate law? And in CS recognized outside India? Is it recognized outside India?
No. Okay. So I've already answered that, but just to briefly touch upon this, CS is not recognized outside India. So if you want to practice in overseas jurisdiction, then CS to be helpful to you at all. But in India, CS is, yes, absolutely, the knowledge is helpful. And when you go into a law firm, or you want to go into corporate law, then absolutely, because CS is a combination of corporate law. So the answer is yes, it is helpful.
Right. Okay. So Mansi is asking, thank you for enlightening us with your valuable words. Sir, how can a student who has gathered interest in IPR work in order to build a CV in that direction? Also, with the onset of COVID, internships have become a far-sighted thing. How can we work to utilize this time efficiently? This you have, I think, already mentioned. You have, if you want to say.
So one thing I'm not. It's not a heavy thing. I'm not touching on the philosophical subject. But one thing which I always believe is that everything has some blessing in disguise message.
Yeah.
This COVID-19 will also have a blessing in disguise message for all of you guys. that even if you have not applied for internship, you can always tell when you go for your interview, you can always say, "Hey, I can't apply for internship," right? So this is one excuse for you to tell people in interview that, sir, because of COVID, I could not get, otherwise I was getting a confirmed internship. One. Second thing, as far as self-study is concerned, again, I repeat that
Yeah.
I feel that internet these days is the best resource available. Uh, just read as many articles as you can. There are various articles written by various lawyers, by various law firms. Start reading on all of that. And coming specifically on the IPR point, there are various industry news which come. That's why I mentioned Economic Times or Financial Times or any other newspaper. When you try and read that, you will come to know that who has acquired the brand, which brand has been acquired by which company, what happens to that. When you start reading that, you will get this information, and that's the best resource available. As an example, for example, all of us know what happened with Vijay Malia's company, Kingfisher, right? Now, the reason why State Bank of India came into trouble and came into news was apparently because the brand value was mortgaged. So, what is the importance of all these brand values? You start reading those news, what happens? You will get that information. And best thing is to read as many articles. And yes, this thing I forgot, I should have mentioned earlier, is particularly on the IPR or on transfer of property or on any other legal subjects. Supreme Court judgments are the best thing to read to get that knowledge. Supreme Court judgments are very, very important.
That you have mentioned. I will tell in the last. You have mentioned this point also. Okay. Yes. So Jitya is asking, sir, what is the most appropriate way to approach a law firm for a job, be it corporate or litigation?
See, I mean, I know it's a very, and I don't mind sharing, saying this in open, but unfortunately, the situation in our country is that many of the law firms don't respond positively. I mean, and it happened with me also, that you just keep on, you will get your emails from them, you will get the emails of their HR or the concerned person from net. It's easily available. But once you write to them, so yes, I know it's a very, it's very unfortunate. Try, I mean, use your contacts. I mentioned that in my slide, is that practically what you should do is that you should try maintaining contacts with your seniors who have passed out, and wherever you have done your internships, try be in touch with those senior associates under whom you have worked. It's all about contacts. If you don't have contact, don't be disheartened. I had no contact. I had zero contact. I did not knew anyone. So, but it worked out well here. I mean, so if you ask me, 20 years back, if I had known somebody and if I had started early, maybe yes, I would have done much better than today. But ये सब subjective बातें होती हैं. क्या पता मैं नहीं कर पाता पता. और मैं ये भी नहीं करा कि आज मैंने कुछ बहुत कुछ कर लिया. So it is all very subjective. Whatever you have in hand, just start with it.
Right, that's true. Now Nikej is asking, sir, does doing again and again they are asking questions on CS. Doing a thing with CS with LLB helps in getting a corporate job. Is it mandating to do CS?
No. Okay, so no. So this is no. So ma'am, so this is a little different question. It's an interesting question. Okay. So don't confuse guys yourself. If you want to apply for a corporate law job, having CS is first of all not mandatory. Secondly, even if you don't have a CS, it does not matter at all. Your skill sets as a corporate lawyer will be judged on how much you know as corporate lawyer in an interview. The only way where is that when you start working, because the knowledge of CS will help you in corporate laws, and vice versa. If you want to join as an in-house counsel, there also it will help you because you will have an advantage of both. But as a pure corporate lawyer, it is not at all mandatory that you should have a CS. I don't have a CS degree, so it's okay.
Right. So another question is, sir, for corporate law, what two optional subjects should one take out of business regulation, international trade, IPR to IT laws in 5th semester? Please don't ask these kind of questions.
Yeah.
Don't ask. Okay, so Parvez is asking, sir, what will be the role of lawyer in industries like media and entertainment?
Okay, so yeah, so that is something which I could not cover because of shortage of time. So any in-house counsel, particularly in media industry or any other industry, these days what has happened, guys, is that in-house counsel job has become equally important and equally demanding, and is paying actually good. I have seen many companies having a team of lawyers which is bigger than a law firm. So when you join an in-house counsel as a company, you will have equally challenging as the law firm job. So, and your job mostly, particularly in media industry, which you have asked, is that you will be required to have intricate knowledge on IPR, because those are confidential things which they may not want to outsource to an external firm, and they would expect from you that you should have an IPR knowledge, and you should know how IPR agreements are drafted, which is transfer of property, transfer of copyrights, I mean, whatever, assignment of copyrights, transfer of brand names and all of that. So your knowledge of IPR is very important in that.
Okay. So Palak is asking, sir, can again they are talking about the yes. Jyotika is asking, and what are my chances of securing a job in the corporate law field if most of my internships were in the field of corporate litigations like RERA, IBC, etc.?
Okay, so I'll be very open with you, because you should, because the idea is, if you have asked the question, you should be, I have to give an honest answer. So yeah, I mean, chances are a little difficult, no doubt in that, because if most of your internships are in corporate litigation, then any tier 1 law firm would definitely want more internships in corporate laws rather than corporate litigation. But it is not that it is impossible. As I mentioned, that you can start with a tier 3 firm or a lower firm or a lesser known firm if you don't want to go into litigation and you want to go into non-litigation area. So start from wherever you have. But yes, chances to apply in a tier 1 firm are little difficult.
Okay. So another question is, I want to know if grade matters in law firms, as it's difficult to get.
Yes, absolutely it matters.
It's difficult to get 60% in faculty of law. Okay.
No, it absolutely matters, because your CV will be shortlisted based upon that only. You will be called if you don't have good grades in law colleges. Your CV will not be shortlisted. So grades matters a lot.
Okay. So, sir, is there any option to start a career in SEBI for LLB students through government exams or any other method by the government?
Ma'am, can you repeat that?
He was asking that, is there any way of doing practice in SEBI as counsels through exam, etc., by government, or how these SEBI,
yes.
etc., they take
Okay.
tickets?
Yes. So I am not completely aware. You should go on to the SEBI website and check for them. But yes, I have come across some people who are in-house SEBI lawyers, and it's some kind of an exam which is required. There might be a qualification criteria of 3 years, 5 years. I don't think they take freshers. But similarly, banks or any other government institution, they also take law. For example, I mean, these days, there are a lot of options which is open as compared to, ma'am, when we had passed out from law college.
True.
Like for example, I have recently come to know that even the Competition Commission also take a lot of lawyers with them as research lawyers, and that's a very good job. That happens, but obviously that will happen after a couple of years of experience. So yes, option is available. So and ma'am, just to go back to the previous question, one important point which I missed. That question was pertaining to what? If you can just before this.
That was about the internship in corporate litigation.
Yeah. So in internship in corporate litigation. No. I'm sorry about the marks. About the marks.
Yes.
So I just want to clarify one thing, that grades are important only to secure a job. So if you are not having good grades, don't think that you will never become a corporate lawyer. Your knowledge, as I mentioned, that your knowledge in corporate law will depend upon what kind of self-study you are doing.
Yes.
A person who has got 60% and a person who has got 40% or 45% or 50% is completely at the same level in terms of working experience, because you start from scratch. It's just that the only difference in grades is to getting a job. So even if you don't have good marks, but if you are able to get a job in any of the tier 3 firm, you can still become a very good corporate lawyer.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so another students are asking questions. Sir, do you think certificate courses on diplomas in specific subjects will help, or any other method will help to improve our knowledge?
Yes, not only knowledge, even chances also. Like for example, I have also done a diploma in corporate laws and management from Indian Law Institute from ILI when I was in my 3rd year.
Yeah.
And the reason why I did that is because I was not a brilliant student. I could not get, I was a very, very average student. I got very average. I don't even want to say that right now. It is very embarrassing. So yes, but definitely the diploma course helps.
Yeah. Another interesting question. I think he's not the right person to tell. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, is it advisable to go for UPSC, or do one should go for corporate sector first and then go for UPSC?
Yeah, you are right, ma'am. I'm not the right person to
I
answer
know.
this.
Palak is asking, sir, can you enlighten on international arbitration? Please, no, this is not the area. We have already called people on arbitration. Don't answer. Sir, should a first year student go for his internship for corporate law? Should we approach an NCLET lawyer, and how to get in touch with them? It's unlikely to get an internship in big law firms for first year students.
Yeah, so without any contact, without any references, it is difficult to get internship in law in big law firms. You can obviously, only thing which you can do is apply and keep on applying and keep on trying. That's unfortunately the only way for those people who have no contact, nothing. But if you don't have any contacts, why is it that? Build your contacts. Now, who's stopping you from building contacts? Go to the courtrooms, try to find some lawyer, try to talk to some senior lawyers. There are many good people also who are interested in talking to freshers. Just try and approach them, just try and request them. Why are you being shy? As a lawyer, you have to be anyway extrovert, right? So just go to the high court, go to NCLAT, go to NCLT. If you find some lawyer, just go and sit there for 3 days, 4 days consecutively. Try to identify a lawyer who's or a law firm who is getting more matters. Just try and approach them through a clerk or known to them. There are various ways to find contact. And yeah, so and what was the first part of the question? I think that was important also.
Okay, I have done that question,
Okay.
and I think that you have already answered that part also. Okay, so hello, sir. It is advisable to switch between litigation and non-litigation jobs, such as in-house counsel, etc., during the initial years. How does that help or harm one in the long run?
Okay, so yeah, that's again very interesting point. I have covered that in the PPT.
Yeah.
See, it's completely individual specific. There is no guaranteed rule as to what will happen. But ideally, I would advise, because I have done this switching, I have done this shifting twice in my career, and I don't know today. So, like I said, it's very subjective. I don't know whether it has worked to my benefit or whether it has worked to my advantage. I don't know if I had not shifted, whether I would have done better than what I'm doing today, or I would have done worse. I don't know. Nobody can know that answer, right?
Hmm.
But yes, as far as shifting is advise that for the first 3 to 4 years you should not shift. If you have joined as a in a law firm, even if the place is not of your interest, don't shift. Build your CV, because what we see as partners, as any person, when a person comes to us, if in the first 5 years, if you have shifted more than 2-3 times, it reflects bad on your CV. So in the first 3 to 4 years, try to stick to one place, and then you would have built your contacts, you would have get your own knowledge. Right now you are scared because you don't know anything. But once you start working, don't believe me guys, that once you start working for the first 2 years, irrespective of whatever place, you will definitely have much more knowledge and idea about what you want to do in life. So don't be scared. It's like you don't know how to swim right now, and that's why you are scared in jumping in the pool. But once you have jumped into the pool and learned to swim, you will find your way. Don't worry about it.
That's true. That's true. Okay, sir, how much masters in IPR would help in the corporate sector? Marks, I think they were asking.
Marks or masters?
I don't know, it's not clear. Okay. How ethical is to approach a law firm for job via their clients, especially if I have already interned with them and they seem to be happy with my work?
No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, what is the why ethical and moral values? It's absolutely fine. I mean, anyone who can give you a reference should be fine here. I mean, you can approach. I
Another.
don't know how the partners will react. I don't know how the other person will react. But if you were to ask me personally, like I am working with few of my clients, if one of my clients tells me that I have somebody who is known to me, can you take that person? Absolutely. I mean, why should I feel bad? I will just say that I will judge, but at least I will definitely give an opportunity for interview. Ma'am, after this, can we just take one more question, because
Yeah,
I'm also
true,
have
true.
another.
So we take the last question from Satyam. Which book that he has already mentioned, Ramaya, etc. And then, sir, how the last year students can apply for job in corporate sectors?
Okay, so I think this is the sum of everything.
Yeah.
Now, the first point, the first priority, if we go stepwise, the first thing is use your contacts. And when I say use your contacts, it happens. And believe me, guys, right now you may feel that you don't know anyone, but as a nahi hota life mein. Till date, you have come to this level. It means that it is because of some support or some people you know, right? So it is not possible that you don't know anyone. Just try to think. People don't think. Just try to think that is there some friend in your family? Is there somebody who's remotely connected to some corporate law firm who can put in a word? That's the first point. A reference obviously helps. Second, if you don't have any references on your own, try to think that if you have done any internships in some places where you have been in touch with those seniors, try to get in touch with those seniors. That's the second point. Third point is try to get in touch with your seniors with whom you may have worked. And that's why the relationship in law colleges become very, very important. So after this, I'm sure that don't try to pick fight with your seniors. Try to keep your seniors in good books. It's very, very important, guys. And I'm not joking. It's actually important because seniors are very, very helpful. Because for seniors also, it is comfortable. So if I am a senior and if I am able to get a job of my junior who was in my law college as my associate, I'm going to be very comfortable in working. So seniors are very helpful. And if you don't have any of these three, then just keep on applying here. Just keep on applying. If you are not able to find a job, my request to you would be, don't sit idle at home. And this is very important that your CV should not be blank for more than 3 months. If your CV is blank for more than 3 months, it is a negative thing. If you are not able to find a job, just find some court lawyer, start going to the courts. At least you will get exposure in law, but don't sit idle for beyond 3 months. 3 months is the maximum time you should give to find a job in corporate laws. If you're not able to find a job if you're not able to find a job, doesn't matter, go to litigation. उसमें काम करो 6 महीना 1 साल, बाद में कभी ना कभी कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स अपने आप बनेंगे, वहां पे आप किसी को मिलोगे, कुछ मिलोगे, with a focus in mind that I am doing this court work only because I have to find some contact, getting a job in corporate law. Don't sit idle at home.
Right. So now I must conclude by saying this, that today's session is, I think, one of the most useful sessions for my student. I'm very happy that they have asked so many questions. And why I'm saying that it is the most beneficial, because the areas which you have covered in the today's presentation, they are all new for us. Even as a teacher also, I did not know much about these areas. And then you have given them proper guidance that how to proceed, even after the presentation itself, that they have to utilize this time of COVID for their self-study, for doing research on the Google regarding the various areas, because law is a vast area, so everything cannot be covered at college level. So you have very well tell them that they have to do online research, and they have to read the judgment of the Supreme Court, because we have seen in for this last so many years, the Honorable Supreme Court has given wonderful judgments on these areas. And
Absolutely.
we have the speaker on IPC also who discussed the judgments, and so judgments are very important. So I must say that you have given us the real and genuine advice how to proceed, and you spared this much time for us. Thank you, Madhavan. Definitely we'll keep in touch and we'll invite you again to touch similar kind of areas for our students.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you on behalf of law.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And all the best, guys. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.